While hiding in the back of class, my mentally ill teacher asked, "Did you all call your parents goodbye?" I was slouched in my usual back corner seat during 6th period, American history, when Mrs. Garcia suddenly stopped mid-sentence about the Civil War and stared at us with this weird expression I'd never seen before. She'd been acting strange all week, showing up to class with dark circles under her eyes and forgetting where she put her lesson plans. Some kids whispered she was having a breakdown, others said she was getting divorced. But when she asked that question about calling our parents goodbye, the whole room went dead silent. 23 juniors just staring at her like she'd lost her mind. Tyler raised his hand and asked what she meant. Mrs. Garcia walked to the door and I heard the deadbolt click. She'd locked us in. My stomach dropped because teachers never locked classroom doors during regular hours. Never. She pulled down all the window blinds in quick, jerky movements while muttering something under her breath. The room got dim and stuffy feeling. Emma in the front row asked if we were having a lockdown drill, but Mrs. Garcia just shook her head and started pushing desks against the door. I pulled out my phone to text my mom, but there was no signal. Complete dead zone, which was impossible because I always had full bars in this classroom. I showed Jake next to me, and he checked his phone too. Nothing. Mrs. Garcia saw us with our phones, and her eyes went wide with panic. "Put those away right now," she whispered. "They can track those. They'll know exactly where we are." Maya asked who they were, but Mrs. Garcia just kept stacking chairs on top of the desks she'd shoved against the door. Her hands were shaking, and she kept glancing at the ceiling like she expected something to crash through. Then the intercom crackled to life. The principal's voice came through, but it sounded forced and mechanical. "All students and staff, please remain in your current locations until further notice. This is not a drill." Mrs. Garcia's face went completely white. She ran to her desk and started frantically shuffling through papers, pulling out what looked like emergency procedure sheets she'd printed weeks ago. She'd been preparing for something. The lights flickered on. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went completely dark. Several students gasped as the classroom plunged into sudden darkness, the only illumination coming from the thin strips of daylight peeking through the edges of the blinds. "Nobody panic," Mrs. Garcia's voice cut through the darkness, surprisingly steady despite her earlier frantic behavior. I heard her fumbling around her desk, drawers opening and closing. I prepared for this too. A beam of light suddenly cut through the darkness as Mrs. Garcia switched on a heavy-duty flashlight. Her face looked ghostly in the harsh illumination, those dark circles under her eyes now looking like deep hollows. "Mrs. Garcia, what the hell is going on?" Tyler demanded, his voice cracking slightly. He pulled out his phone, the blue light illuminating his face. "I still don't have any signal." Around the room, other students were checking their phones too. The eerie blue glow of 24 screens revealed identical no-service messages across every carrier. "That's impossible," Emma whispered from the front row. "We all have different providers." Jake stood up suddenly, moving toward the door. "This is ridiculous. I'm getting out of here." "Jake, don't!" Mrs. Garcia swung the flashlight toward him, the beam catching him halfway to the door. But Jake ignored her, reaching the door and trying the handle. He pulled hard, then pushed, then rattled it violently. "It's stuck," he said, turning back to face us. "The deadbolt won't budge." "Of course it won't," Mrs. Garcia muttered. She moved to the cabinet behind her desk and pulled out a large black backpack I'd never seen before. It looked military grade, with multiple compartments and straps. "They've initiated containment protocols." The intercom crackled to life again, making several of us jump. The principal's voice came through, but something was off about it. The cadence was wrong, like someone reading from a script they'd never seen before. "Attention all students and faculty. Please remain in your secured locations. External communication is temporarily disabled for your safety. This is standard procedure. Do not attempt to leave your current location. Assistance will arrive within the standard response window." The message repeated once more before cutting off abruptly. "That didn't sound like Principal Matthews," I said, my mouth suddenly dry. It sounded almost pre-recorded. Mrs. Garcia nodded grimly as she unzipped the large backpack. Because it wasn't him, not really. She began pulling out items, bottles of water, energy bars, small packets that looked like military rations. "Everyone, take one of each," she instructed, passing them around. "We don't know how long we'll be here. You've been planning for this," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper as she accepted a water bottle. "You knew something was going to happen." Mrs. Garcia didn't deny it. "I've been tracking the patterns for months. The signs were all there if you knew where to look." Emma, who had moved to peer through a gap in the blinds, suddenly gasped and stumbled backward. "There's something out there," she whispered. I saw movement. Several students rushed to the windows, trying to see through the narrow gaps between the blinds. "Get away from there," Mrs. Garcia hissed, but it was too late. I caught a glimpse of what had frightened Emma, dark silhouettes moving across the school grounds. They weren't shaped quite right, too tall and thin, moving with an odd, jerky gait that no human would use. Tyler turned from the window, his face pale. "What the fuck are those things?" He pointed an accusing finger at Mrs. Garcia. "And who are they? The ones you said could track our phones?" Before she could answer, a loud thumping sound came from above us. Something heavy was moving across the roof, directly over our classroom. The sound moved from one side to the other, then back again, as if searching for something. "They found us faster than I expected," Mrs. Garcia whispered, more to herself than to us. She looked up at the ceiling, then back at our terrified faces. "I guess you deserve to know the truth now." She took a deep breath. 3 years ago, a government facility about 30 miles from here was conducting experiments on perception, manipulation, and reality distortion. Something went wrong, catastrophically wrong. They created entities that shouldn't exist in our dimension, and now those entities are looking for ways to fully enter our world. Maya, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly called out from the back corner of the room. "Guys, look at this." Her voice trembled as she pointed at the wall. We all turned to see what had frightened her. Strange markings were appearing on the classroom wall, symbols that looked like they were being etched into the paint by invisible hands. They formed patterns that hurt my eyes to look at directly. "They're coming through," Mrs. Garcia whispered, her face ashen. "Faster than I thought possible." I looked around at the barricaded door, the sealed windows, the strange markings spreading across our walls, and the terrified faces of my classmates. The realization hit me with crushing certainty. We were completely trapped, with no way out and no one coming to help us. The thumping on the roof grew louder, more insistent. Something wanted in. And whatever it wasn't human. A thin wisp of gray fog began seeping under the classroom door, curling across the floor like ghostly fingers. At first, it was barely noticeable in the dim light, but within seconds, the The tendrils had spread halfway across the room. Don't breathe it in, Mrs. Garcia shouted, diving back into her emergency backpack. She pulled out a box of surgical masks and began tossing them to us. Cover your mouths and noses. Now, I caught one and quickly secured it over my face, watching as the other students did the same. The fog had a strange metallic smell that penetrated even through the mask. What is that stuff? Maya whispered, her voice muffled. Mrs. Garcia didn't answer. She was too busy distributing the remaining masks, her movements becoming increasingly frantic. Jake, who had retreated from the door, was holding his phone up, moving it slowly around the room. His face had gone completely pale. Guys, he said, his voice trembling. Look at this. He turned his phone screen toward us. He had the camera app open, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Through the phone's camera, the fog wasn't gray at all. It was filled with shifting, shadowy figures that seemed to be moving purposefully through our classroom. They were tall, impossibly thin, with elongated limbs that ended in what looked like too many fingers. What the fuck? Tyler whispered, grabbing his own phone. I see them too. One by one, students pulled out their phones, using the cameras to track the invisible entities moving among us. On our screens, they appeared to be examining us, leaning in close to peer at our faces. The intercom crackled to life again. The principal's voice came through, but it sounded even more distorted than before, like someone was slowly turning a dial that stretched his words. Adi and all students and faculty. The school is now in complete lockdown. Remain in your secured lobby locations. External doors have been sealed for your protection. Do not attempt to leave the building. Help will arrive within standard procedures. The message ended with a high-pitched whine that made several students cover their ears. Emma, who had been watching Mrs. Garcia closely, suddenly let out a small scream. Her hands! She gasped, pointing. We all looked. Mrs. Garcia was arranging supplies on her desk, but her fingers, they were longer than they should be. As we watched, they seemed to elongate further, becoming thin and almost translucent at the tips. Mrs. Garcia noticed us staring and quickly hid her hands behind her back. It's nothing, she said sharply. Focus on what's important. The class erupted into chaos. Half the students backed away from Mrs. Garcia, while others moved closer to her, seeking protection. You're one of them, Tyler accused, pointing a shaking finger at her. What the hell is happening to your hands? I'm not one of them, Mrs. Garcia snapped. This is what happens when you've been fighting them as long as I have. They change you. This is insane, Tyler said, backing toward the windows. We need to get out of here. He grabbed a chair and swung it hard against the glass. The chair bounced off without leaving so much as a scratch. Tyler tried again, putting his full weight behind it. Nothing. The glass should have shattered, but it remained perfectly intact. I told you, Mrs. Garcia said. They've sealed us in. Normal rules don't apply anymore. Who exactly is they? I demanded, finding my voice. You keep saying that, but you haven't explained anything. Mrs. Garcia sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. I wasn't always a history teacher, she said quietly. I served in a specialized military unit tasked with investigating anomalies, things that shouldn't exist but do. We called them threshold entities. The lights suddenly flickered back on, blinding us momentarily. When my eyes adjusted, I gasped in horror. The hallway outside our classroom was visible through the small window in the door, and every inch of the walls was covered in the same strange symbols that had begun appearing in our room, intricate, angular markings that seemed to shift and change when you weren't looking directly at them. Those symbols, I said, pointing. I've seen them before. Mrs. Garcia's head snapped toward me. Where? Online. There's this conspiracy forum I sometimes read. They had posts about government experiments and symbols just like these. A look of recognition crossed her face. You're the one who wrote that paper on conspiracy theories last semester. I should have known. Maya called out from the back of the room where she'd been examining the air vents. These are sealed shut, she said, running her fingers along the edge of the metal grate. It's like they've been welded closed with some kind of, I don't know. It's not like any metal I've seen before. Mrs. Garcia nodded grimly. They're thorough. They don't want anything getting out. She moved to her desk and began gathering various items. Scissors, ruler, stapler, pencils with sharpened points. She started binding them together with rubber bands and tape, creating crude but dangerous-looking implements. What are you doing? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Making weapons, Mrs. Garcia replied without looking up. They can be hurt if you know how. As she leaned forward to reach for more supplies, the collar of her shirt shifted, revealing strange markings on the back of her neck, similar to the symbols on the wall, but these looked like they had been carved into her skin. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Several students exchanged worried glances. Mrs. Garcia, I said carefully. Those marks on your neck. She straightened immediately, pulling her collar up. Battle scars, she said tersely. What happens when they get too close? A soft whispering sound began emanating from the walls around us. At first, it was so quiet I thought I might be imagining it, but gradually it grew louder. The whispers weren't in any language I recognized. They sounded like a combination of static and clicking sounds, with occasional words that almost made sense before dissolving back into gibberish. They're communicating, Mrs. Garcia whispered, her eyes darting around the room. They're coordinating. Coordinating what? Jake asked, his voice cracking. Mrs. Garcia looked at him, her eyes wide with fear and determination. Their entry point. They need a way in, a tier in reality large enough to fully manifest. The whispering grew louder, and the symbols on the walls began to glow with a faint bluish light. Get away from the walls, Mrs. Garcia ordered, herding us toward the center of the room. And whatever you do, don't touch the symbols. We huddled together in a tight group, 23 terrified students and one increasingly strange teacher, surrounded by glowing symbols and invisible entities that only our phone cameras could see. What do they want? Maya whispered. Mrs. Garcia's elongated fingers tightened around her makeshift weapon. Us, she said simply. They want us. A deafening crash sent us all diving to the floor as ceiling tiles directly above Mrs. Garcia's desk came crashing down. A cloud of dust filled the air, making our surgical masks suddenly feel inadequate. Through the newly formed hole, something metallic glinted in the dim light, a bizarre apparatus with spinning components and blinking lights that didn't look like any school infrastructure I'd ever seen. It's their monitoring station, Mrs. Garcia whispered, her voice tight with fear. They've been watching us for months. The device emitted a low, pulsing hum that made my teeth ache. It had a central component that looked almost like a camera lens, but instead of glass, it contained a swirling, oily substance that seemed to move with purpose. What the hell is that thing? Tyler demanded, backing away until he hit the the wall. Mrs. Garcia's eyes never left the device. I've been fighting them for years, she said, her voice suddenly steady. Ever since the incident at the research facility, they took my team, my friends. I was the only one who made it out. Her elongated fingers curled around one of her makeshift weapons, a ruler with sharpened pencils bound to it, creating a crude but effective-looking spear. We need to signal for help, Jake said, turning to Tyler. The football field is right outside. If we could somehow get a message out there. They'll see us, Mrs. Garcia warned, but Tyler was already nodding. The emergency flashlights in the science lab across the hall, Tyler said. They're powerful enough to signal Morse code if we can get to them. I know Morse code, Jake added. My dad taught me when I was a kid. Mrs. Garcia shook her head frantically. You can't leave this room. It's not safe out there. But Tyler and Jake were already moving toward the door, determination on their faces. We have to try something, Jake insisted. We can't just wait here to die. Before Mrs. Garcia could stop them, they had unbolted the door and slipped out into the hallway. The fog swirled around their ankles as they disappeared from view. The moment they left, a piercing alarm blared through the school. It wasn't the normal fire alarm or lockdown siren. This was something else entirely. A sound that oscillated between frequencies so high they hurt my ears, and so low they made my chest vibrate. Several students covered their ears, crying out in pain. That's not a school alarm, Emma shouted over the noise. What is that? Their signal, Mrs. Garcia said grimly. They're coming. While the others huddled together, I noticed a leather-bound journal sticking out from under a pile of papers on Mrs. Garcia's desk. With everyone distracted by the alarm, I quietly moved toward it and slid it into my hands. The journal was filled with Mrs. Garcia's handwriting, but it looked different than the neat script I was used to seeing on our graded papers. This was frantic, with words underlined multiple times and entire pages covered in the same strange symbols that now adorned our classroom walls. I flipped through it quickly, catching glimpses of entries. June 17. They found me again. Had to move. Third time this year. August 30. Started position at Northridge. Should be safe here for a while. The symbols are appearing less frequently. October 12. Saw one of them in the teacher's lounge today. No one else noticed. They're getting closer. December 4. The fog is back. They're testing the boundaries. The last entry was dated just yesterday. They're coming tomorrow. I can feel it. The classroom is the only safe place. I've prepared everything. God help us all. A scream from across the room jerked my attention away from the journal. Emma was backing away from Mrs. Garcia, her face pale with horror. Your arm, she gasped, pointing. What is that thing in your arm? Mrs. Garcia's sleeve had ridden up, revealing what looked like a small metal device embedded in her forearm. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the apparatus hanging from the ceiling, a blue light blinking beneath her skin. It's how I track them, Mrs. Garcia said defensively, pulling her sleeve down. How I know when they're coming. Maya had been unusually quiet, studying the markings on the wall with intense concentration. These aren't random, she announced suddenly. They're coordinates, latitude and longitude. We all turned to look at her as she pointed to a specific sequence of symbols. This repeats over and over. It's a location. About 30 miles from here, just like Mrs. Garcia said where that government facility is supposed to be. As Maya spoke, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began forming on the windows, delicate crystalline patterns spreading across the glass like living things. They're trying to freeze us out, Mrs. Garcia muttered, rubbing her arms. Standard containment protocol. The intercom crackled to life again, but this time the principal's voice sounded almost normal, which somehow made it more terrifying. Attention students of room 237. Evacuation protocols have been initiated for your safety. Please proceed in an orderly fashion to the east exit where transportation is waiting. Repeat, proceed to the east exit immediately. Mrs. Garcia's eyes widened in panic. Don't listen, it's a trap. The east exit leads directly to their collection point. Her behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. She paced back and forth, muttering to herself, occasionally stopping to press her hands against her temples as if in pain. Her eyes darted around the room, focusing on things none of us could see. I exchanged glances with Maya, who looked as concerned as I felt. Something wasn't adding up. The bizarre apparatus, the journal entries, the implant in Mrs. Garcia's arm. It all pointed to something serious happening, but her behavior was becoming harder to trust. While Mrs. Garcia was distracted, I slipped over to her desk and quietly pulled open the top drawer. Inside, partially hidden under a stack of hall passes, was an orange prescription bottle. I carefully lifted it out and read the label. Garcia, Elena, risperidone 2 milligrams, take twice daily. Below that was another prescription. Lithium carbonate 300 milligrams, take as directed. I quickly searched online what these medications were for. The results made my stomach drop. Antipsychotic medications, typically prescribed for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Jake appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. Tyler's still trying to signal from the science lab, he reported. But guys, the hallways are completely normal. There are no symbols, no fog, nothing weird at all, just empty corridors. He looked at Mrs. Garcia with concern in his eyes. I think Mrs. Garcia might need help. Not the kind she's talking about, but real medical help. Mrs. Garcia whirled on him, her face contorted with rage and fear. They got to you, she accused. They're using you now. Can't you all see what's happening? The strange apparatus hanging from the ceiling suddenly emitted a series of rapid beeps, the lights flashing faster. Mrs. Garcia looked up at it, her face draining of color. They're coming through, she whispered, backing away. This is it, the final breach. The ceiling around the hole began to crack and splinter. Dark shapes moved in the space above, elongated limbs reaching down through the opening. But as I watched, I realized with growing horror that the shapes looked disturbingly like normal human maintenance workers trying to assess the damage to the ceiling. Mrs. Garcia screamed and lunged forward with her makeshift weapon, aiming at the figures above. Before she could reach them, she suddenly staggered, clutching her head. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed to the floor in a heap, her body convulsing violently. Someone help her, Emma cried, rushing forward. As the class erupted into chaos, the truth hit me with devastating clarity. There was no invasion, no government conspiracy, no alien entities. There was only a teacher who had stopped taking her medication, whose mind had created an elaborate delusion that she had somehow pulled us all into. The real emergency had been right in front of us the whole time. The pounding on the classroom door seemed to go on forever before it finally burst open. School security officers rushed in with flashlights sweeping across the room, followed immediately by paramedics in blue uniforms. The The sudden flood of normal, everyday adults made the bizarre nightmare we'd been living through collapse around us like a house of cards. "She's over here," Emma called out, kneeling beside Mrs. Garcia's still convulsing form. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, gently rolling Mrs. Garcia onto her side and checking her vitals. One of them opened a medical kit while speaking into a radio clipped to his shoulder. "Female, mid-40s, active seizure following apparent psychotic episode, administering 5 milligrams of diazepam now." I stood frozen, watching as they stabilized her, unable to reconcile the terrifying invasion scenario with what was actually happening. The strange apparatus hanging from the ceiling was nothing more than exposed wiring and a broken smoke detector that had fallen when the tiles collapsed. Principal Matthews appeared in the doorway, his face drawn with concern as he surveyed our classroom. The barricaded door, the covered windows, the scattered emergency supplies. It all looked so different in the harsh fluorescent lights that had mysteriously returned to normal. "Everyone, please gather your things and proceed to the auditorium," he announced, his voice nothing like the robotic tone we'd heard earlier. "Your parents have been notified and many are already waiting to take you home." As we filed out, I noticed the hallway walls were completely normal. No strange symbols, no fog, no evidence of anything supernatural, just the same beige paint and motivational posters that had always been there. In the auditorium, Principal Matthews addressed us all with a gravity I'd never seen from him before. "What happened today was not a drill, but it was also not the emergency Mrs. Garcia described to you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Mrs. Garcia has been suffering from a serious mental health condition. She stopped taking her prescribed medication several weeks ago, which led to today's unfortunate episode." Murmurs spread through the group of 23 juniors as we processed this information. "Mrs. Garcia served honorably in the military before becoming a teacher," Principal Matthews continued. "During her service, she experienced traumatic events that contributed to her PTSD and schizophrenia diagnosis. When properly medicated, she's an excellent teacher, which is why none of you noticed any serious issues until this past week." Tyler raised his hand. "But what about our phones not working and the principal's voice on the intercom sounding weird? The school's cell signal booster malfunctioned this morning, creating a dead zone in that wing of the building. As for the announcements, those were standard lockdown protocols. They might have sounded strange because Mrs. Garcia was interpreting them through her delusions and sharing that interpretation with you." I thought about the prescription bottles I'd found in her desk. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. "What about the fog under the door?" Maya asked. "And those things we saw through our phone cameras?" Principal Matthews shook his head. "There was no fog. The shadows you thought you saw were likely maintenance workers responding to the electrical issues we were having. Your minds filled in the rest, influenced by Mrs. Garcia's vivid descriptions." 3 days later, I stood outside Pinewood Psychiatric Hospital, clutching a get-well card signed by most of our class. The nurse at the reception desk directed me to a sunny visiting room where Mrs. Garcia sat by a window, looking smaller somehow in her hospital gown. "Thank you for coming," she said when she saw me, her voice quiet but clear. Her hands were normal now, no sign of the elongation we thought we'd seen. I wanted to apologize to everyone, but they're only allowing limited visitors. I sat across from her, unsure what to say. "How are you feeling?" "Better, clearer." She gestured to the window. "They're still out there, you know, watching. But the doctors say that with medication, I can learn to recognize which threats are real and which ones are created by my mind." I nodded, not wanting to contradict her, but not agreeing either. "I know you found my medication," she said suddenly. "In my desk drawer." "You do?" She nodded. "I saw you, even in the midst of everything," I noticed. "You're observant. That's good. Stay that way." The following week, our school held a special assembly on mental health awareness. A psychiatrist explained how conditions like schizophrenia can cause completely realistic hallucinations and delusions, and how stress can trigger episodes in people who normally function well. After the assembly, Emma approached me in the hallway. "Did you know this happened before?" she asked, her voice low. "At her previous school in Colorado. My cousin goes there. Mrs. Garcia had an episode during finals week last year, locked herself and some students in the lab and claimed toxic gas was leaking into the building. I hadn't known, but it explained why she'd transferred to our school so suddenly mid-year. Over the next few weeks, our class formed an unofficial support group. We'd meet in the library during lunch, processing what had happened. Some students were angry, feeling manipulated and frightened for no reason. Others felt compassion for Mrs. Garcia, understanding she hadn't intended to terrorize us. I spent hours researching the conspiracy theories that had fueled Mrs. Garcia's delusions. The government facility she'd mentioned didn't exist, but there were countless online forums dedicated to similar stories, shadow organizations, reality distortions, entities from other dimensions. Reading them gave me chills, seeing how thoroughly these ideas had consumed her mind. Principal Matthews implemented new protocols for teacher mental health screening and support. What happened wasn't just a failure of one person, he explained during a parent meeting. It was a systemic failure to recognize warning signs and provide appropriate support. A month after the incident, our new American history teacher arrived. Mr. Daniels was younger than Mrs. Garcia, with a booming laugh and an energetic teaching style that quickly won over most of the class. But something about him made me uneasy. It was nothing obvious at first, just the way he sometimes paused mid-lecture, glancing at the ceiling as if listening for something, or how he'd arranged his desk to face the door with a clear view of all entry points. During our unit on the Cold War, he spent an unusual amount of time discussing government experiments from the 1960 seconds. "Not everything made it into your textbooks," he said with a knowing look. After class one day, I noticed him applying hand sanitizer methodically, covering every inch of skin up to his wrists. When he saw me watching, he quickly pulled down his sleeve, but not before I glimpsed what looked like a small scar on his forearm in almost the exact same spot where Mrs. Garcia had her implant. As I left the classroom, my phone lost signal for a moment, the screen flashing "no service" before returning to normal. Probably just a random dead zone, I told myself, but I couldn't help glancing back through the classroom door window as I walked away. Mr. Daniels was standing perfectly still in the center of the room, looking up at the newly repaired ceiling with an expression of intense concentration. And for just a second, I thought I saw the lights flicker.